During the talent show, Christmas carols were sung in English, which opened the show. Then a young man recited a poem, and a man who was finished spoke. Croatian adults danced and sang, then a little girl played the piano. No one remembers who she was. Then the talent show ended with all the kids singing. There was a Mother Goose play that had been prepared, but the children were getting restless, so the play was rescheduled for an evening party, also to be held in the Italian hall. Then at last it was time for Santa Claus.
Excitement at last. It was time for Santa Claus to arrive. The children were directed to line up along the north wall and climb the enclosed north stairway to the stage where gifts were to be distributed. Annie Clemens was in charge of the party, aided by Anna Willicka, Ellen Lesh, and Teresa Sizer. Mrs. Lesh checked IDs at the main doors until 3 o'clock when she could find someone to replace her so she could help hand out gifts to the children on the stage.
Mrs. Lesh went to warn people at the various entries not to allow the kids who had already received gifts back into the hall. Noise and confusion behind the stage grew as shouting, pushing, and screaming children in the dense crowd began climbing onto the front of the stage. They should have waited their turn down the north stairway. Sit down, yelled Annie Clemens, who had run to the stage to quiet the crowd. There was so much noise and confusion, no one could hear what was being said.
I was 12 years old when I was in the Italian Hall disaster. My name then was Selma Urkala. There were 4 of us, and we lived in Copper City at the time. We went with the streetcar to the program in Red Jacket. I was 12 and my sister was 14. There was a neighbor boy and girl with us too. The boy did not return with us when we went back. When we were told to get in line to come on the stage for gifts, I distinctly heard someone ask for water because someone had fainted. Then somebody hollered fire. Before we got off the stage, everyone was saying, "There's a fire."
Above the saloon, people were eating and watching the talent show. They would stomp their feet after the performance instead of clapping because they were busy eating. When an intruder yelled fire, people ran to the door and made a lot of noise. Down in the saloon, men heard the feet and they thought someone had won the talent show. But they were wrong. Above them, 73 people were dying.
I was in the kitchen when they opened this pail of candy and when somebody hollered fire. We went into the hall from the kitchen. My mother said, "Come back." So we went to the kitchen. We stayed there for quite some time. As we looked into the hall, tables and everything was turned over. My mother said, "We better get out of here." So we started running to the stairway. As I was going down, my mother told me to take my sister with me. I was walking between the people lying on the stairs. I wondered why there were women there too. I went right to the bottom of the stairs, where I thought I could get out. The people were all piled up on the stairs. I tried to open the door from the inside, but you couldn't pull the door inward because people were piled up there. So my mother and my mother's lady friend said, "Come on back up the stairway." So I did, and I got my sister, and she and I went to the top of the steps when the firemen came.
Annie Klobuchar was born in 1888 in Calumet. George, Anna's father, worked in the mine and lost his job because the train was robbed. The company had all its money stored on the train. In 1905, Anna, 16, fell in love with Joseph Clemens. Annie's first years of marriage brought her no children, so she had time to do things around the community. Because of the strike, mining children's parents didn't have enough money to provide them with presents. So Annie, with the help of the women's club, organized the party for the children. Annie was one of the cooks in the kitchen, and when fire was yelled, she knew there was no fire. She saved a few children by taking them into the kitchen to wash dishes, but many were lost. Big Annie Clemens died on a summer morning in her home of cancer in 1956. Even though she is gone, she's not forgotten.
Charles Moyer was the president of the Western Federation Mining Company. He left the copper country rather quickly on December 26th. Moyer had come to settle the strike in Calumet. No one seemed to care why he left the copper country so suddenly. It was reported that he was approached by many men in his room in the hotel called the Scott Hotel in Hancock. Representatives of the Citizens Alliance met Charles at the hotel. He was visited by the sheriff of Houghton earlier and was told that if he and his friends didn't leave the copper country, that the sheriff was not responsible for their safety. The representatives urged him to change his mind about the donations collected by the Alliance.
The Federation president was finally confronted by several men in his hotel room. A fight took place and shots were fired. Moyer was then hung over the Portage Canal Bridge and threatened to be killed if he didn't leave town. Later, an Associated Press reporter interviewed Moyer in Green Bay, Wisconsin. It was reported that his head was swathed with a blood-stained bandage, and he spoke bitterly of the treatment that was inflicted on him. This is what he said: "I was assaulted by members of the Citizens Alliance and armed Wattle Mohan men in the Hotel Scott. I was terribly beaten, shot in the dark, dragged more than a mile through the streets, threatened with death and hanging, and was finally placed aboard the train at about 9:30.
The Italian Hall disaster affected people for a long time after it happened. Here's what happened since Christmas Eve 1913.
After it was all over, there were 73 people killed. 55 of them were children under 13. All of the bodies were hauled to the village hall to be identified.
There were 2 children that weren't identified until one day later because their families were out of town and the people that they were with died with them.
Here are some people that died from this area.
Mary Cranich, age 11.
Anacota Jarvie, age 4.
Mary Smock, age 5.
John Sari, age 5.
Walter Murto, age 9.
Elizabeth Mihelich, age 9, and 49 others too.
There were 6 churches that took care of all the funerals. They were
Bethlehem Finnish, Finnish National, and the Finnish Apostolic Church.
The Catholic churches were St. John's, St. Mary's, and St. Joseph's.
All of the caskets were ordered from Milwaukee and delivered by train.
In the early afternoon, smaller processions coming from those churches moved along 5th, 6th, and A Street to merge on Pine Street into a bigger procession going on Pine Street to form at the cemetery.
Because the Italian Hall doors opened inward, people were prevented from escaping because of the press of dozens of bodies behind them. Because of this, the laws now say for these buildings to have double doors and that they push out instead of pulling in. There was also a law that these buildings have at least 2 exits instead of 1 in case flames are blocking one.
The Italian Hall has many songs, poems, movies, and books written about it. The most popular song was the 1913 Massacre, written by Woody Guthrie in the late 1940s. There was also a poem called Stairway to Tragedy by Wilbert Mackey. A new movie is being made by 2 filmmakers from New York called 1913 Massacre. There were a few books written: Tinsel and Tear by Peggy Germain, Stairway to Tragedy by Wilbert Mackey, and Rebels on the Range by Arthur Turner.
In the early 1980s, the Italian house came down because the floors were rotting and nobody could go in. The village of Calumet decided to tear the Italian house down. A group of people called the Friends of the Italian Hall tried to raise enough money so they could turn the hall into a museum, but they needed $10,000. They only raised a few $1,000 so the Italian Hall got torn down in the year 1984. The money they raised was used to make this park in memory of the people who died here.
After the building was torn down in 1984, it was decided to move the arch to the center of the property where I'm standing now.
They planted new grass and put up plaques dedicated to the people who died here.
As you can see, there are also park benches and a sign here behind me telling a story of what happened here.
The scars of the strike of 1913 through 1914 and the Italian Hall tragedy are still an open wound in the memory of the community.
Thanks go out to the Friends of the Italian Hall, local union members, Calumet Village and Calumet Township who've worked hard since the building was torn down in 1984 to have this park established.
This park is dedicated in the memory of the tragedy here on Christmas Eve of 1913 because of a fire that did not exist.
We'd like to dedicate this program to all the people who died here.
Thank you for watching.
Take a trip with me in 1913 to Calumet, Michigan in the copper country. I'll take you to a place called Italian Hall, and the miners are having their big Christmas ball. I'll take you in the door and up a high stairs. Singing and dancing is heard everywhere. I'll let you shake hands with the people you see and watch the kids dance round the big Christmas tree. You ask about work and you ask about pay. They'll tell you they make less than $1 a day, working their copper claim, risking their lives. So it's fun to spend Christmas with children and wives. There's talking and laughing and songs in the air, and the spirit of Christmas is there everywhere. Before you know it, you're friends with us all, and you're dancing around and around in the hall. Well, a little girl sits down by the Christmas tree lights to play the piano, so you gotta keep quiet. Hear all this fun, you would not realize that the copper boss thug men are milling outside. The copper boss thugs stuck their heads in the door. One of them yelled and he screamed, "There's a fire." A lady, she hollered, "There's no such a thing. Keep on with your party, there's no such a thing." A few people rushed and it's only a few. It's just the thugs and the scabs fooling you. A man grabbed his daughter and he carried her down, but the thugs held the door and he could not get out. And then others followed, 100 or more, but most everybody remained on the floor. The gun thugs, they laughed at their murderous joke, while the children were smothered on the stairs by the door. Such a terrible sight I never did see. We carried our children back up to their tree. The scabs outside still laughed at their spree, and the children that died there was 73. The piano played a slow funeral tune, and the town was lit up by a cold Christmas moon. The parents, they cried, and the miners, they moaned. See what what your greed for money has done.